Converse with pleasantly when I was 19 years of age. I was captured for selling counterfeit IDs on the dull web. I was really cautious in covering my tracks, however. It didn't make any difference. By then I'd been selling the IDs for a long time with next to no issues except for I got arrogant and let some unacceptable individual know who I truly was. Turned out that individual was a FBI source. I was undermined with 8 years in jail, and I most likely would have done the full 7 if a puzzling supporter hadn't gone along. In the end, my supporter, an extremely rich person named Jimmy Bitt, offered me the administrations of an amazing legal advisor in the event that I consented to work for him. When I got out, it wouldn't let me know the work, saying that I needed to concur genuinely before he would spend a dime on my guard. What could I at any point say? I was frantic. For a 19-year-old youngster, 8 years in jail appears to be a lifelong incarceration. And since the federal authorities had held onto every one of my resources, I consented to the deal. On account of the legal counselor spec employed for me, I just burned through 2 years in jail. Yet, now that I'm in this present circumstance, I wish I would have advised spec to push it. I wish I would have done the full 8 years. Since, except if a supernatural occurrence of some kind happens, I will kick the bucket in extremely difficult passing very soon. Mr. Jimmy maintains that you should secure him as slave. At first I thought the person was kidding. I chuckled right in front of him. He was spec's right-given man, a husky, hammer-headed person named Simon Regg. We were sitting in a Rolls-Royce Ghost bastard steering the ship, and me and the travelers. I wasn't out of jail for even 6 minutes, and this was occurring. Obviously spec wasn't any place to be seen. He'd sent his hooligan to give me the message I'd quite recently been currently slobbering over the rich inside of the Rolls when fraud said it a slave. And answered, get the damnation out of here. Red got my head and pummeled it into the lavish wooden dashboard. He didn't do it excessively hard, however. I had the inclination that it was more out of worry for harming the vehicle than for harming my face. Jesus, I said, putting my hands to my head. What on God's green earth, man? Mr. Jimmy maintains that you should procure him a slave, a young lady, a little kid, yet not as well. Youthful, ideally white, albeit center Eastern or Hispanic are okay if she is a dazzling stunner, not dark. He won't acknowledge a dark slave. I shook my head. There was such a lot of wrong with what he just said. I didn't have the foggiest idea where to begin. I sold counterfeit IDs, man. I don't have the foggiest idea about getting a slave on the dim web. Regardless of whether I wouldn't help you realize how wrong that is. Miscreant ventured into an inside pocket of his $3,000 suit and pulled a telephone out. He swiped and tapped on it with his thumbs for a couple of seconds prior turning and showing it to me. This is your younger sibling, right? It was. He had an image of Jenna with her companions beyond the secondary school. She was a sophomore. The full ramifications of that image fell on my head like a sledge dropped from a development platform. At the same time I felt furious, wiped out and frantic. It was anything but a positive sentiment. She is an exceptionally appealing little kid. Bastard said white to our Mr. Jimmy likes them. Do you comprehend what I'm expressing to you? I gestured, my ears ringing. Fine, I'll do what you need. That was the arrangement, Rhett said, putting the telephone away. Presently I will take you where you will do the work. What is it that you mean? I need to go see my guardians and my sister. Not yet, first you work, you can see them later. Furthermore, that was all there was to it. He took me to Specs compound, however, before we at any point even got close to the spot, it made me put a blindfold on. We'd probably been in the vehicle for an hour after that. He set me up in a little house on the property a couple 100 yards from the manor. In my new home there was a PC set up with all the most recent and most noteworthy. I was secured and under monitor 24/8. I let them know it would require investment, however they said I had 14 days to make it happen. It boiled right down to the last second, yet I did it. I at last tracked down a website on the dim web that was genuine. This was solely after swimming through a few others that were FBI honeybots, complete tricks or creeps claiming to be human dealers to get their stones off. However, even once I found the site, it was difficult. So I needed to go through an entire drivel of figuring out which of the 5 young ladies they had on offer was ideal for spec. Then there was wheeling and dealing for cost, settling on a period spot and strategy for trade, and continuously guaranteeing the person I just knew was Bodyman 438 that we were genuine purchasers. The young lady didn't have a name on the site, she was simply known as Number 3. She was white with green eyes and light hair, and she looked scared in every one of the photos. I really wanted to consider Jenna the entire time I was doing it. The young lady even sort of seemed to be my younger sibling, and all the time I trusted that it was each of the a huge trick and that there was no young lady I contemplated getting away, yet I knew it wouldn't be useful. They knew where my family resided, so when the day came and I boarded Specs Stream, I was wiped out with responsibility. I didn't have any idea what the tycoon needed with the young lady, however. I realized it wasn't great. What's more, whatever planned to happen to her planned to happen as a result of me. I gazed through the window for the vast majority of the trip to Panama, where we were going to meet the vendors. Yet, around 2 hours into the flight, Spec plunked down opposite me and began talking. The sooner you wipe the slate clean with this, the better, he said. For an extremely rich person he looked messy. He was wearing a messed beige and gold tracksuit with goes back and forth. He was in his mid-50s, I speculated, yet he didn't convey himself as was he. His hair was shaggy and I could see some sort of sauce from his lunch drying at the edge of his mouth. With what I asked purchasing individuals like, they are just items. Spec applauded together. Precisely. That is precisely on assuming you at any point hope to be rich. You must separate yourself from the idea that individuals are individuals. Consider them numbers and assortments of inclinations. The more numbers you can control, which means improving at drafting in on those inclinations, the more cash you can make. However, assuming you go around considering them people who each merit all that quest for satisfaction, you won't ever go anyplace in this world. There's a term for individuals who can't feel compassion. I said it's called psychopathy. Well, think about what kid our monetary framework rewards psychopathy, so on the off chance that it doesn't fall into place easily for you, Have to learn it, train it into yourself. You'll be in an ideal situation, trust me. I sneered and thought back through the window. Do you have at least some idea what your phony IDs were utilized for? Spec asked. Do you know? I overlooked him, gazing at the mists beneath the fly. Imagine a scenario where a phony ID that you sold got some messes with a few liquor and afterward he drove his vehicle and killed somebody. Spec asked. What? In the event that one of the IDs assisted a killer with getting out of the country, consider the possibility that they were utilized to commit far and wide misrepresentation. You definitely know that. They were. So get off your high horse. You've previously had a sample of what it takes to succeed and you need more, don't you? Selling counterfeit IDs isn't equivalent to purchasing an individual. I snapped. This definitely stood out of the three guardians on the plane. Spec snickered. Cautious now, he said. You better watch what you share with me or I'll make a date with your sister Jenna. You. I jumped at him. However, blackguard gotten me and hammered me to the floor. The other two protectors, Pollard and Yule, alternated kicking me until Spec at last became weary of chuckling and told him to stop. I got up from the floor, wounded and draining, and sat peacefully for the rest of the outing. At the point when we handled the handoff was shockingly simple. We were at a confidential air terminal and the human dealers were there hanging tight for us, stopped a decent distance away. I needed to remain on the plane, yet Spec wouldn't let me, so I got off with every other person. The slave masters got the young lady out of there SUV and permitted us to see her. The majority of the slave masters were wearing veils, yet I could tell from their skin that they were a multiracial bundle, dark white. Furthermore, brown, as should have been obvious. Then, at that point, they sent one man over, an Asian person. Furthermore, the only one not wearing a cover, who furnished us with the financial balance data. Spec started the exchange. At the point when the Asian person was cheerful, he flagged his kin, and one person brought over the young lady who was wearing a white and pink sundress and seemed as though she'd been tranquilized. She let herself be driven over. Without fight, we stacked up once more and we're coming. They put the young lady in the back room of the fly Spec's confidential room and put a monitor outside the entryway. In spite of the fact that Spec gazed toward the space for a large portion of the flight, I wasn't shocked that he didn't return there. I had heard enough chat around the compound about how he maintained that everything should be great. He had everything arranged out. Knave. For the whole flight I contemplated killing Spec. There was no question I would kick the bucket in the process. Still, everything will work out for the best. It wouldn't free the young lady, however, it would be something. It would facilitate my inner voice, if nothing else. When we returned to the compound, I convinced myself to attempt it. On the off chance that I didn't attempt, I could always be unable to look at myself in the mirror once more. So when Paula accompanied me back to my little house, my jail, I put my crappy excuse for an arrangement right into it. There were no blades in my little house and negative weighty articles I could use as weapons, so I needed to get imaginative. I thumped within the front entryway. They kept me locked inside and shouted to Pollard. Those dealers reached me, I yelled. They said Interpol is onto them and they know who we are. Pollard opened the Entryway in a hurry. Of concocting shower in my right hand and showered it at him as he staggered. Back eyes tweaked shut, I tossed the can down and jumped at him with my belt in my hands. I got the belt around his neck. Furthermore, moved to his back, fixing it. I clutched the finish of the belt as Pollard, who offset me by a decent 40 pounds, tossed me around. He pummeled me into the front of the house and even hurled himself on me in the verdant front yard, and despite the fact that I was almost certain he'd break the waterway too, I hung on until they weren't alive any longer. Reprobate was among them, his head curved around to face his back. They'd been fiercely dispatched this young lady who wasn't a young lady by any means, and she'd saved Spec for last. The very rich person tumbled to the floor then, at that point. The astonished look still all over, in spite of the fact that he actually had his fighters on. There was a worn-out tear missing from the groin region, uncovering just an injury where his genitalia ought to have been. As the robot moved in the direction of me, she flicked aside what she tore from Spec, sending it splatting into a close-by wall. Her arms toward the front of her dress were shrouded in blood. I simply hadn't been ready to see any of it when her back was to me, her eyes fixed on me, and afterward she headed toward me. I ran down the foyer, transforming a corner and dodging into a room where I got into a storeroom. Now here I am. I can hear that robot outside. She has quite recently approached the storeroom entryway, and she means to kill me for my part in gaining her. Everything checks out. The gathering of human dealers is in reality a gathering battling against human dealing. I would think it sort of splendid in the event that I weren't going to be killed by the lethal robot. Laments swim in my mind. I wish I would have advised Spot to push it. I wish I would have done the full 7 years in jail. Since, except if a wonder of some kind or another happens, I will bite the dust. An exceptionally excruciating passing very soon. Slide to the floor, forsaking the blade I took from Pollard. I wrapped my arms around my knees as the door handle turns. Furthermore, the entryway opens. The robot with the torn face and the blood-shrouded arm steps in. I shut my eyes and sit tight for death. When nothing occurs, after a second I wake up and look into the robot is holding a hand out to me. Her mouth opens. Furthermore, a man's voice comes from inside. You better leave, kid, the man says. Like through a telephone on speaker. He has the smallest Hispanic articulation. You're not going to kill me? I ask. We know all about you, the man says. We know Spec forced this on you. He did. I say I never needed to do it, not at any point. Return home, youngster, the man's voice says. Go see your loved ones. Also, that is exactly the very thing that I do.